Blog Talk Radio.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Good evening, Arizona Cardinals fans. I am your host, Jess Root, and this is Revenge of the Birds radio on a Tuesday night. Not just any Tuesday night, the first Tuesday night after the Arizona Cardinals logged their first victory of the 2013 season. We're going to be talking Arizona Cardinals football as always, and specifically we'll be talking about their 25-21 victory over the Detroit Lions on Sunday. We're going to get started here in a couple of minutes. Before we go, if you would like to call in to react or to give your thoughts, questions, comments, give us a call, 646-478-3787. In a moment, we will be joined by Seth Cox, as we are each week, and he will be with us in just a second. Let me get him pulled on the line as he is calling in right now. And we welcome Seth Cox to the program tonight. Seth, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Jess. How are you doing?
Doing great. We will be flying, instead of a trio, we're not quite flying solo, but we'll be flying the duo tonight. Ben won't be able to be here tonight, but we have a great show lined up for everyone tonight. How excited were you to see the Cardinals win on Sunday, Seth?
Oh, it's always great to get a win, and especially against a good offensive team like the Detroit Lions. They did a really good job slowing down that offensive attack, and you saw a lot of things that honestly I didn't expect to see this early already, and that was the defense, kind of picking up the slack and making plays and getting big stops at big times, and that's always great to see.
Yeah, well, and basically, let's get a quick rundown of the game. We have the game start out. We've got the Arizona Cardinals opening at home. They've got a whole lot of things. Their first home game of the regular season against a team that probably was looking for a little bit of vengeance coming in as the Lions came to town last year in a bit of a funk themselves in the middle of a losing streak, much like the Cardinals. The Cardinals had lost 9 straight. Detroit comes in, and they get spanked. They get spanked 38-10 by the terrible Arizona Cardinals of 2012. They didn't have to do much offensively. Beanie Wells scores 3 touchdowns, but the bigger story was the pass defense. They harassed Matthew Stafford and had 3 interceptions, 2 that were returned for touchdowns during the game. Calvin Johnson had some numbers, but didn't find the end zone. And you would think, I thought going into this game that one of the stories would be the Lions remembering what happened. However, it was a bit of a slugfest to start the game, scoreless first quarter, and then we get the first blood in the second quarter, and we have a couple of big plays. Well, we have one play in particular that kind of got Cardinals fans worried a little bit, and that was the 72-yard catch and run by a Calvin Johnson on a play that it looked like Carlos Dansby would make an interception. The ball gets through somehow. Calvin Johnson makes the catch, and then a split second of loss of concentration by Patrick Peterson, and Johnson's off the races, finds himself in the end zone for 6 points. Matthew Stafford throws for a couple of touchdowns, the two passes to Calvin Johnson, but the Cardinals didn't panic. They didn't finish drives early. They got a field goal. They got a touchdown. They went into halftime. Trailing by 4, trailing 14-10. They go into the third quarter. They cut it to 1, and then the yuck play. Carson Palmer, kind of a quarterback that we've kind of known over the years, that people around the league know, known to make some head-scratching throws, and he had one of those that was returned for a touchdown. They're down 21-13, and it looks like it kind of everything gets the air gets kind of let out of the tires. It's kind of deflated everything, so they're down 21-13, and you're thinking, oh no, now it's going to happen, because the Detroit offense looked like it was going to get going. However, they toughed it out. Another Jay Feely field goal, another Jay Feely field goal, and so they're at 21-19, and they manage to score, come from behind. So they were down 21-13. They squeak back in the game, a field goal, and then in the fourth quarter come together with the deciding touchdown as they march down the field, as they finally convert on a third down play. And they find Rashard Mendenhall bust into the end zone for the touchdown. And then the Arizona Cardinals, left with less than 2 minutes, gave the ball back to Detroit. They tried to move down the field and were unable to. Held them on fourth down in Arizona territory. And that was the end of the story. It was a story of defense. It was a story of changes. It was a story of offensive lack of rhythm for a bit. Young players did new looks defensively. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, as Seth and I will discuss it. Let's talk about what was the most impressive thing that we saw out of the game. Seth, I've been talking a lot, so give it. What were you most impressed with the Cardinals' win on Sunday?
The most impressive thing to me on Sunday was the way Bulls game planned and played defensively. I'm a huge Ray Horton fan, as everybody knows, and he just the way he came out and had that game plan in his back pocket. I went back and watched a little bit today for my good, bad, and the ugly that I just sent over to you shortly ago, and I went back and watched, and that dime or big nickel, whatever you want to call it, defense where he moved Bell down to linebacker and took Brinkley out happened on play 3 of the game. So I mean, it happened right away. It wasn't something that they held on to or anything like that. And he went right in for it, and it resulted in Brinkley playing only 17 snaps defensively during the game, and it resulted in, the Cardinals in the second half getting together in that defensive secondary and putting together a really dynamic game to hold a very talented Lions passing attack in check. Now, I really do think some of that was due to Reggie Bush being useless in the second half and, basically not being able to play. But, the Cardinals were able to score points without Larry Fitzgerald being of any use in the second half. So, it kind of was a wash for that point, and the Cardinals defense did more than the Lions defense, and I give Bowles a ton of credit because I feel like that game plan was exactly what he needed, and probably the week before, but it was what the Cardinals needed to come out and get a win.
I was equally impressed with the defense on a couple of levels, because one, if you look at how their defense has been playing the first couple of weeks, it's quite a different story. They're not getting pressure, but they're stopping the run. So you look at a year ago, Ray Horton's schemes were able to generate pressure, but they weren't as effective. For whatever reason, they did not have the success at stopping opponents' running games. And again, that has much to do with Reggie Bush getting hurt in the first half, as it does anything else. But the Cardinals have a really good rushing defense so far, and it has set things up rather nicely. So I was really impressed with that. We saw we got to see John Abraham early. He didn't really make much noise after that, but John Abraham on the very first play of the game makes a play in the backfield for an 8-yard loss. Was impressed to see that right away. I was actually, as much as as there were issues on third down, I was impressed offensively with a few things. The running game looked good. Rashard Mendenhall ran well. I counted. I have to go back through my game notes. But Rashard Mendenhall had several strong runs of double-digit yards, and he got to touch the ball quite a bit. And on top of that, he had the dump-off pass as well that went for 20 yards. I was real impressed with his play. I was impressed with the way in which the Cardinals didn't give up or get deflated after that pick six. When a season ago, at the end of 2011, the beginning of 2012, one thing that they showed that they were is a very mentally tough team. Then it kind of fell apart after that. Bad things kind of had things unravel a bit. But even after the interception, things didn't go backwards. They didn't go sideways. And another thing I really, really liked is kind of seeing, as we see it rolling out, this is exactly what the Cardinals wanted to do last season. They wanted to have enough offense to get the job done, put some points on the boards, not get stranded on 3 and outs, and then put the defense in a position to win, which is exactly what they did. They scored points late, and then they turned the ball over. They turned it over to the defense to do the job. And it's exactly what they wanted to do a season ago. Darnell Dockett, it's like, hey, they want the responsibility. They had the responsibility, did it. It's the blueprint a year later of what the Cardinals wanted to do. Was there anything else that stood out to you on either side of the ball, other than that? Well, we had lots of different looks defensively. Anything else that stood out?
Yeah, I really liked the run game. You hit on it a little bit. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about and that I wrote about in the beginning of the season is that I really feel like Andre Ellington is the best fit at running back for this offense. I know they're getting him more acquainted to the game, so to speak, and they're raising his role on running the ball, but I'd like to see him get even more carries, especially not out of the fullback trap type of thing with Ndamukong Suh playing defensive tackle on the other side. But as you talked about a little bit, the running game in general was impressive. Mendenhall was what Mendenhall does. He, as you said, he has some chunk yardage runs, 11, 6. I'm just going through my charts right now, 20, 11, and then after that it was a lot of 1s and 2s and negatives, but everything was, but that's what Mendenhall has been his entire career. It's not going to change. That's what he's always done. He's been a guy that is going to be able to get you, he's going to end up with 4.5 yards per carry at the end of every game, and he's never going to be a guy that has 15 carries for 150 yards. He's not Reggie Bush. He's not Melvin Gordon, for those ASU fans that watched Melvin Gordon run all up and down the field against ASU on Saturday night. But he is a guy that you can count on to break a bigger run every once in a while, and that was nice to see. And then, like I said, with Ellington, I like that he got some touches out of the backfield. I like that he got some chances to show what he can do, because he is the most dynamic player on offense that they have in space. He's a bigger, stronger, and frankly a little more north and south speed version of LaRod Stevens-Howling. But he's a guy that you can, I think, eventually give a bulk of touches to. It may not even be this year, but I was impressed with the way that they used the run game to really balance the offense and make it an efficient approach as opposed to the previous week.
Something you were talking about, those short plays and negative plays. That's actually something I've been quite impressed with thus far. Is in the past few years with the running game, especially last year, we saw, well, in LaRod Stevens-Howling it happened, Beanie Wells it happened, Ryan Williams it happened. It happened with all our running backs the past few years. Lots of negative plays, lots of gains for lots of no gain, lots of negative plays. And I'm flipping through my game chart here. And I think in the entire game they ran 66 offensive plays. They ran the ball, I don't remember how many times. But they had only 3 negative plays in the running game. 3. There was, early in the game, it was in their third possession, and I believe this was a running play to Ellington, if I recall, when they were running the 2 backs. He lost 3. Then there was a play later on. There's another play for -3, and that's later in the game, and there was a -2. But I think I counted only 3 negative plays in the running game, which is something completely new. I mean, at the end of the game, they didn't have a great yards per carry. Pull that up.
No, and that's one of the things I talked about on Twitter that kind of got fans a little upset with me. But they're not going to have a great yards per carry. They're just not. The interior of the offensive line without Jonathan Cooper is not nearly strong enough. But Levi Brown and Eric Winston do a good enough job that they can get the bulk of their yardage running outside of the tackles, and that's where they did get the bulk of their yardage.
And that's going to be the difference this year. They're not going to have a huge yards per carry. They ended up with 3.5 yards a carry. 3.5 yards a carry. That's on the low end. But they're having less negative plays, which is so. If they're gaining yards, they're not lowering their yards per carry because of negative plays. They're seeing forward progress where even on first down, if it goes for 1 or 2 yards, it's 2nd and 8. They run it again. They run it for 1 or 2 yards. And even if they stuck with that running game, here they're in a more manageable 3rd and 6. I've been real pleased with just that fact that we just have eliminated a lot of those negative plays. Another plus, what can you say about the offensive line play? I mean, it wasn't superb, but Carson Palmer at the end of the game was only sacked once. And I don't want to say, everything's fixed, because we could see the same thing if we looked at the first 3 games of the season. I believe the first 4 games of last season when they won those games. While the offensive line play wasn't good, I believe they gave up, was it over the first 4 games, something like 6 or 7 sacks. I have the numbers somewhere, but they gave up 1 or 2 sacks in each of the first 2 or 3 games, and then the floodgates. It was all of a sudden where the Rams game, they look at the film and said, hey, their line isn't doing good, but they kept the quarterbacks fairly clean, and then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, and it was hit after hit after hit after hit. And Carson Palmer admittedly after the game said he got a little skittish. He wasn't setting his feet. He was going through his reads too quickly and at the beginning of the game, but then he slowed things down, and that's when he started when he made those plays late in the game.
I think the offensive line was deceptively average, I'll say. One of the things, and I don't know if you charted it, but I did, one of the things I charted and I noted heavily in this game was Palmer took a lot less down the field throws, something that that Arians has talked about quite a bit. And the reason for that was simple. He had to get rid of the ball. So, and I think I tweeted this to you last night. I had them down giving up 8 total quarterback hits. So sacks or Palmer being hit combined in 8 times. It was 10 times the week before, which resulted in 5 sacks, and there was 5 additional hits. So they're at 18 so far this season. Last season they were at 12 at this time, and that's a twofold issue. One of the issues is that Arians wants to get the ball deep, and so those routes take time to develop. And he's and this is something that we've known about him since day one, that, his quarterbacks take a pounding. They just have. Roethlisberger did, Luck did, Palmer's going to. So I think the offensive line did a better job of keeping the sack total down, but a lot of that I attributed to Palmer making the check down throws. I mean, Jim Dre was your leading receiver in receptions with 5 total receptions on the day. You saw a lot of, I think Michael Floyd's yards per catch average was only 7. So you saw a lot of under 10-yard throws being made, as opposed to what you saw in game 1, which was a lot of throws, 10, 12, 14 yards plus down the field. And it's an acclimation process for Palmer. He's going to get used to the offense and what he needs to do in order to keep himself from being hit or taking sacks. And it was better, though. Like, don't get me wrong at all. But it's still, to me, Palmer getting hit 8 times is still not a great recipe for success, because he does have an injury history, and that's something that they'll want to clean up going forward. But it does come with the Bruce Arians offensive territory.
Now, the biggest thing that we get out of this, they got the win, which was, you look at the league, you didn't want to be 0-2, and you didn't want to be 0-2 heading into the road trip that they're about to take, where they're going to head to New Orleans and they're going to head to Tampa Bay. And even though neither one of those teams has been particularly impressive in the first 2 weeks, yes, the Saints came away with a win over Atlanta. Yes, the Tampa Bay, ended up losing. New Orleans came away with a win, but it was by no means impressive. Things seem to be kind of falling off, and the wheels seem to be falling off a little bit in Tampa Bay. But how big was getting this win, this first win early in the season? How big is that to the rest of the season, especially after we saw, well, granted, we started 4-0 last year and things fell apart. You didn't want to start off 0-4 and then still be able to talk about hope and competing and winning and trying to get into the playoffs if you're 0-4. How big was that first win for the team?
I thought it was huge. I thought, getting Bruce Arians his first real win, and I know he had 9 wins credited towards him for last season, but getting his first win with a team that is his team, his vision, that type of stuff, I thought that was really important. And you look at what it showed. It showed that this team is, and it's something I've said numerous times, this team is going to be competitive all season long. They might not win a ton of games, and that's not something that we hope for or anything like that, but they may not win a ton of games, but they're going to be in every game. And that, at least to me, is exciting, because we didn't have that last year. Even with that 4-0 start that you talked about, all of us as fans kind of sat there going, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop, and when are things just going to fall off, go off the rails? We were waiting for it, and then it happened, and it was worse than we could have ever imagined, obviously. But but we knew it was going to happen. This year, I watch these games, and I say they're going to be in this game. They're going to be in it to the end. I don't see many blowouts. You look at what Seattle did to San Francisco on Sunday, and yeah, that can happen to the Cardinals. If it can happen to San Francisco, it can happen to any team. So I'm not saying they're not going to get blown out, but I don't look at the schedule and go, oh, we could see another 58-0 type of game. I look at the schedule and go, okay, they may lose, but it's, is it going to be a 10-point game, maybe 2 scores? It's not going to be a 4-touchdown blowout where they're not close the entire time. So I feel like it was important to get wins, because getting wins in this league, is all that really matters. But I also feel like it's important to have been competitive in 2 straight games.
Well, and I look at it in this as well, because the whole offseason, Bruce Arians has been preaching competitive. We're not rebuilding. We're going to win. We're competing to win the division. We need to win our home games. We need to scratch out a few on the road, and we're going to get to the playoffs. It's really hard to keep the players to actually believe that. And yes, they say it because players say very few times you're ever going to hear a player say anything other than what every other player is. And just talk about getting better every day at a time, about improving every day, about giving your best effort, counting on your teammates, not letting your teammates down. They say some of the same things, every player in some sort of way. And they're going to talk about, yes, they're going to win now. They're going to come out of things. But to get that first win out of the way early, that has to be huge for the coaching staff, so that there isn't, and especially with the way in which they won, that they had to rally, it really kind of fortifies and solidifies, forges that whole idea that what they are doing can work. And the players can then see it working, and there's no doubt in it. They've seen it happen, and that will be something to build on later on. And I think there are people thinking 1-3 start. At the worst, they couldn't come out. If they had ended up winless, I think fans would have started jumping off the bandwagon, the Bruce Arians bandwagon. And while there's still some hope, an 0-4 start would have been terrible for the Cardinals fans. Now we're 1-1. If they come away 1-3, I think that's about where pretty much everyone thought they would be, and maybe scratching out a win, perhaps Tampa Bay, and coming out in 2-2. That's going to keep that hope, especially for fans, Cardinals fans, and you know it as well. Cardinals fans jump off at the first sign of danger. They jump off. I've seen it every year where there's hope. If we can do it, we can do it. Oh, crap, it's done. And that's typically how it's been, because that's the history of the Cardinals. We talk about, there's hope this year, and never mind, not again. And so I think that's really big for the coaching staff, for the players, to see the results early, and not only that, just to keep the fans engaged and to have the hope, because there is a positive vibe with the fans right now.
Yeah, and you look at the schedule going forward, not to get too off topic from Sunday's game, but you look at the schedule going forward, and you look at it and you go, okay, wow, I mean, they could be 1-7, but they could also be 5-2 or 4-3. I mean, there's just so much in between for this team, because we still haven't seen them put a full game together. One of the things that I talked about after the game one was just how bad the defense was. Well, when we saw the adjustments made, we saw what Bowles did, and after I went back and watched the film on game one, I was actually really impressed with where Bowles had his players at. He had them in position to make plays, and they just missed. And that's not on the coach. That's on the players. And you saw the result of that. Brinkley out. Jeremiah Bell playing closer to the line of scrimmage. He's not there. We're not going to allow him to get be back in coverage, and he's going to have to play that hybrid linebacker position, and that's where he's going to be, because that's that keeps him out of deep coverage. You saw Rashad Johnson is still he's still just Rashad Johnson. He's not a great player. He's a good player. Another one that was interesting to me, and I don't know if you noted this, but I took note of it. They didn't use Dan Williams very much. And that might have just been the game plan, because they didn't expect the Lions to run very much. I mean, I think the Lions only ran the ball something like 18, 19 times in the game. But they didn't use Dan very much, and that was unexpected to me, at least. I thought he would get more run.
Well, here's some of the formations. I was going to bring this up a little later in the show, but the defense used a lot of different formations. They used a variety. In fact, their 3-4 with the 7-man. They only used, there was four plays the entire game where they were actually in base. in their base formation. They played a standard nickel, their regular nickel package, which is the 2-4 with the 4 linebackers where they bring Dan Williams out. They did that 7 times. They had Shaughnessy in there lined up as he's listed as an outside linebacker, but anytime he's in the game, he's got his hand on the ground. So while he's listed as a linebacker, he always lines up on the line, whether it be a little bit wide or not. But there was a 3-3 formation 3 times, a 4-man line with the 2 linebackers 4 times, and then they went to the dime, big nickel, whatever you want to call it, where the 4 safeties were in the game. They were in that formation for 38 of the 57 defensive snaps, their defensive plays that were on the field. So 2/3 of that. I didn't catch. I don't know in what. So naturally, so Dan Williams was in there for those 4 plays on the base, guaranteed. I don't know how many of those 4-man lines. They ended up going with a 4-man line during the game, 14 plays. 10 of them with only Dansby in as a linebacker, with Bell playing as a linebacker, and then they had 4 plays where they were with the 4-man with the 2 linebackers. So I don't know how many, but he had a total of, I think it was, let me see it, it's 15 snaps, and that really kind of jives with almost what they did last year. And I expect we're going to see this defensive formation, this type of defensive idea in the next game against New Orleans, against the spread out, the very potent passing attack. So we're not going to see it against teams like Seattle. We're not going to see it against San Francisco, but we're going to see it against these teams. And Dan Williams last year, he would only get a dozen to 15, 16, 17 snaps against teams like Green Bay when they played nickel a whole bunch, or against New England when they played nickel almost the entire game. That doesn't surprise me at all, especially once Reggie Bush came out of the game, that they didn't need that after that.
Yeah, and you look at it, that, like you said, that jives with the Brinkley not playing as well. Getting Brinkley and Williams out of there, that really does add some speed to your defense. They still aren't getting pressure on the quarterback at all, and like you said, we'll get to that. But you have to be excited with how much they've improved the run defense, and they're still using odd formations to do it. So it's not like they're going to a base package and giving up chunk throws or big plays in the passing game. They're doing it out of their odd formation fronts, and that's putting the pressure on Campbell, and hey, Darnell Dockett showed up this week, but that's putting the pressure on those guys to make plays, and so far they've done it. So
yeah, looking at the running game, at least I was trying to get some conclusions of it's going to be a post I'm going to have on the site tomorrow, and again, just those of you who are listening, this is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm just Rudy. We're talking to our guest and one of the writers from the site, Seth Cox. If you have any comments you'd like to call in and give us your thoughts, any questions, you can give us a call at 646-478-3787. And I was charting through after I broke down the different formations, what were the yardage, what were the different plays they ran, and when they were going with that big nickel dime, the 4 safeties, they ran the 2-man line where they had Calais Campbell and Darnell Dockett. That was their chunk. They ran that for 20 plays, and that was what they expected to be the passing play, because there were, of the 20 plays that they were out there in the 2-3, in that 2-3 set, it was 15 plays passing and 5 plays running. And then you move to the 3-man line, where they had a 3-man line with the 2 linebackers. That was 8 snaps, 8 plays. 6 of those times it was with a pass and 2 against the run. They decided to run with that big nickel dime that set pretty much the second half, and what they did, instead of going to base or removing a defensive back, they would take one of the linebackers and they went to the 4-man line with just Dansby in the linebacker spot, and they did that 10 times. And you could tell they anticipated those running downs, because of those 10 plays, 7 of those 10 plays were run plays, where they saw the 4-man line And even with their nickel, when they had two linebackers, when they went with a four-man line and two, they had they were 3 plays running and 1 play passing. And so it went from, they had 10 runs and 4 passes with the four-man line, and that's how they combated, okay, we're going to keep our defensive backs, and this is how we're going to defend the run by putting one of our bigger guys up front without losing the speed behind us.
Well, and the other thing in that aspect is Tony Jefferson, and this can kind of go into the next topic I know you wanted to hit on, but yeah. Tony Jefferson was outstanding in run support. I mean, just outstanding. Knifing in, making plays. He is really, really good at that. And that was something he showed at Texas. He's not a great coverage safety. He's not bad by any means, but he's not going to be a back end guy that just is able to blanket half the field, or that you can leave back there as a single high guy and just let him go make plays. But he's a guy that you can bring up to the line. He can play and run support, and he plays downhill really well from the strong safety position. And that was something that I think Rashad struggles at a little bit, and Bell is okay at it, but he's always a step slow at it. He's not. He gets there, but it's 7 yards down the field, as opposed to Jefferson's making plays 2 yards down the field, or he even made a couple plays in the backfield, or attempted a couple plays in the backfield where he slowed up the runner. So I thought that was something that came up really huge for him, is his ability to get in there and play run defense is just, it's a really big boost to a secondary that at the beginning of the season and through 2 games as well has a lot of question marks still.
Well, dare I say this? Now, granted, he's not the same build as these other guys, but it sounds like in Tony Jefferson, if he continues to develop, is the type of player that we're used to seeing. We've got Jeremiah Bell this year, but in all the years previous, we had Adrian Wilson, who is the guy that is great up and run support. Would that not be, aside from that he's not got the same build, but it is the same type of prototype that the Cardinals have been used to seeing now for a good decade?
Yeah, and the thing is with Jefferson is he's never been a guy that has had huge speed coming out of the back end. You talk about his build. He kind of plays like Kerry Rhodes, just not as good in coverage as Rhodes, but he kind of plays like Kerry Rhodes did against Philadelphia. When he got to play strong safety most of the game, or all of the game that week. You saw that he's able to play close to the line of scrimmage and make an impact. You saw that he can drop into coverage and be near the ball and make plays. And that's something that's really, really big for the Cardinals defense, because Bowles is using a more complex back end as opposed to what Ray Horton liked to do, where he was more complex on the front side, or up front on the defensive side of the ball. So it's important that they get that support from Jefferson, and that he's able to do enough in the run game to kind of offset his lack of playmaking ability on the backside. And that's what's nice is he's not going to be, like you said, he's not going to be even Adrian Wilson maybe in pass coverage. I mean, maybe older Adrian Wilson, but not necessarily, the Adrian Wilson of old. But he's going to have games where he's solid in coverage, and he does a good job. And he's going to have games where he gives up big plays. That's just what's going to happen, because he's not, like I said, he's not great in pass coverage. He doesn't have a huge explosiveness on the back end, but he has the ability to make plays. He sees things really well from the safety position, and he's able to get moving and get in the right direction early enough that he can make impactful plays, despite his lack of speed on the back end.
Now, let's go with this. Let's hold off on the talking on the younger players and the role they played, and kind of the discussion we were going to take is Bruce Arians versus Ken Wisenhunt on the young players. Let's put that after, since we're on the kind of on the topic of the defensive formations. You mentioned how Todd Bowles does more complex work on the back end, while Ray Horton's tended to be more complex on the front end with the blitzes. I was really impressed, and it was interesting just to see look of the last defensive coordinators. Go back to 2010 with Billy Lewis, just at least schematically. The Cardinals, I believe I looked at it, I had the stats at one point. The entire 16-game season, they went with only 5 defensive backs 5 times all season. So anytime they went passing downs, they brought in an extra corner and an extra safety. Almost every time. And part of that was probably the fact that they didn't have the talented linebacker that they wanted, and they did that way they can bring in some other guys. They had Matt Ware coming in at the time. They had Mike Adams. And then later in the years when Rashad Johnson started seeing more time late in the season. 2011, 2012 with Ray Horton, I don't think I saw 6 defensive backs on the field. I didn't chart them all, but I don't ever remember seeing it ever. It was very, very... They either had base coverage, their 3-4, or they had 2-4. So they took Dan Williams out and they brought in the extra defensive back. They went with 5 defensive back almost exclusively in the passing game. This year, and it was one of the things that I was noticing in training camp, is they were running with a lot more. They did a lot of sets in the dime with the 6 defensive backs. Only it wasn't what we saw against Detroit. It was with 4 corners, where they would have Javier Arenas, or at the actually would be Tyrann Mathieu as the dime, and Anton Kaysen would come on in with Gerard Powers sliding into the slot as well, with Kaysen and Peterson playing on the outside. So we saw that during training camp. How much do you think we're going to see this moving forward? Especially in 2 more weeks, we're going to have the dynamic of Darrell Washington back. How much is that a smart thing? I expect to see it against New Orleans. I fully expect to see that against New Orleans, if anything else, because of Drew Brees and the way they like to move the ball around. Do you think that's something we're going to see beyond that, or if that's going to be one of those game planning sort of things that were the talent that they were playing against dictated if they needed to do something different?
I think it's a combination of both. Like I said, last week, Bowles had his guys in position a lot to make plays, and they just missed. And that's not something you can blame the defensive coordinator for. So I think what ended up happening was he went with, it was a little bit different scheme, but he went with different guys. I mean, that's just what ended up happening. And I know Tony Jefferson was really the only difference, but he put, moving Bell down and putting Jefferson in was kind of the only real move he's made thus far, personnel-wise. So all he's doing is he's using those complex schemes in the back end, whether it be going zone with man principles on Calvin Johnson and Nate Burleson that we saw a little bit of, going all zone and passing guys off with quicker defensive players on the back side, but also a little bit more physical players, or if it's putting Bell in kind of a spy role to be able to cover Joique Bell and Reggie Bush out of the backfield. That was what he did, and he did that last week. I don't know if you charted it, but in the Rams game, and it was one of the plays I highlighted in what went wrong during the game. The Rams ran a route with Darrell Richardson, kind of an angle route, an out route, just a little swing route, kind of similar to what the Lions did a couple times with Bush and Bell. And they had Gerard Powers as the spy to Richardson on the play. And so it was kind of the same big nickel formation that we saw, or the dime formation with Powers moving into the linebacker role to spy on Richardson. And what ended up happening was they had Richardson dead to rights, I think, for a 2-yard gain, and Powers just whiffed. That's not on the defensive coordinator. He put the play call in perfectly. He did exactly what you wanted to see. He had one of his better, more agile defenders on a very quick, running back, and what ended up happening was the guy just missed. And so I think what we're going to see going forward is he's going to tinker with the personnel, but he's not going to change the scheme so much. He's going to put the guys on the field that he feels like give him the best chance to be successful. Does that mean when Washington comes back, who's going to be replaced in those situations? Is he going to replace Dansby, or is he going to replace Jeremiah Bell, or is Bell going to move back to a strong safety position and they're going to take out Tony Jefferson? It's a lot of moving parts, but I think for the calls themselves, Bowles does a really nice job of switching things up, going from a lot of man principles to a lot of zone principles, from drive to drive, to confuse the quarterback and the wide receivers to make those throws, a little more difficult. And one of the things that I wanted to hit on was that when he does put them into a zone principle, they do a really good job of knowing where the sticks are and not allowing players to get past them. And again, that comes back to tackling. He did it in week 1, and the guys missed a lot of tackles. He did it again in week 2, and the guys made tackles, including the game-ending tackle by Tyrann Mathieu. It's all about getting your guys in a position to make plays. And through 2 weeks, Bowles has done that really well in the secondary and linebacker and coverage aspects, at least to me.
And something that it's kind of going along with that. It's really two of the big plays, and we look at, there were 2 really big plays in the passing game that happened. Obviously, the one that was the touchdown by Calvin Johnson, and the other one was that pass play to Reggie Bush where Bell lost him, and he just blew right by him. Those actually those were pretty well schemed after talking to Bruce Arians. Now, obviously, the one with Patrick Peterson, if you look, and he said it himself, he thought Dansby picked that ball off. In fact, he saw the ball go to his hands. He thought it hit his hand. Then he said he thought he heard the ball hit the shoulder pads of Dansby when it actually was hitting Johnson's shoulder pads when he made the catch. And so it was that split-second loss of concentration when he thought, turnover, and he took his eyes off Calvin Johnson when he was in the position to make a tackle right there at the catch. And that missed that loss of concentration. So they were in the position to make that play. Great. That if he stays unconcentrated, it's a 10-yard gain. The other one was that Reggie Bush play, and that was a mistake on Bell in the fact that he thought that he had inside help. That's why he didn't keep going with Bell. That's why Bush just blew right by him. It's not because Bell couldn't keep up with him, which in part we know he can't exactly keep up, but he thought he had inside help, but it wasn't there. And so 2 of the biggest plays, so about almost 100 yards worth of Detroit offense, were on plays where one, it was just a split-second lack of concentration, and one where it was where someone thought they had help, and when they were schemed for pretty well.
Yeah, and like you said, he schemed for it well, and it just comes down to execution at this point. I've been impressed with what he's been able to do on the back end of the defense. And now, as we go along in the season, it's going to be interesting how that kind of shakes itself out, as he has not been able to generate any pressure whatsoever. The Cardinals have 1 sack on the season, as we all know, by Calais. But more concerning to me is that I've only charted that they've hit the QB a total of 5 times. That's, a sack or a hit after the quarterback's released the ball, but they've only hit the quarterback 5 times. That's not acceptable, at least to me. You have to have somebody there that can get to the quarterback and can create pressure on the quarterback, and it's just right now it hasn't shown up. So you have to wonder, they're giving up a lot of yards through the air still, so you have to wonder how long that's going to be able to stay in place where they are able to give up, a lot of receiving yards, but, not so many touchdowns. So it'll be an interesting dynamic to follow.
One closing thought on the defense. We kind of got the feeling, at least I had the impression, that in week one, it reminded me a lot of the beginning of the 2011 season where things just hadn't gelled. And we saw it gel more in week two, where there wasn't they were in position to make plays. I really am excited to see over the next few weeks how they turn the corner. If it's just a moment in time, whether it's something they continue to build on, and where the fans can see, hey, Todd Bowles isn't that bad after all. He was a finalist for the original position that Horton got. Ken Wisenhunt was really impressed by Bowles. He's well regarded throughout the league. I'm really interested in seeing how that moves forward and see if that Ray Horton mystique wears off a little bit, because being what the Cardinals had last year, their defense, there is a lot of, everyone loves Ray Horton. It was just what he did defensively, and he's starting to get sort of that love in Cleveland again as well. Let's move on to the young players. We had significant contributions in the game of these young players. You've brought up Tony Jefferson. He played a good chunk of the snaps. You had Tyrann Mathieu making plays again. He had the pass deflection on the blitz where he basically took the pass off the face mask. You had Andre Ellington scoring on the touchdown on the wheel play, making the one third down conversion on the play that got overturned where it said he was fumbled but didn't. He made major contributions on offense, big plays there. So you have Matthew, you have Jefferson, you had Kerry Taylor, who stepped in for Larry Fitzgerald, who made 3 very important catches down the stretch. And yet, we see him playing young players, and Bruce Arians was quoted as saying, I don't have a problem playing the young players. I don't have a problem doing this. And yet, so we still see Kevin Minter sitting on the bench. Now, granted, you can understand that in part because of the scheme that they ran. Alex Okafor for the second week in a row, inactive. And then you look at the young players, at least they weren't his draft picks, but you look at the previous draft picks over the last couple of years. Ryan Williams was inactive. Bobby Massey was inactive. Nate Potter, who ended up being a starter last year, he's buried on the depth chart. He's a main depth guy now. Jamel Fleming, who still very inexplicably what exactly has happened to him as a player. He barely makes the squad, and now he's a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so you see he's playing some young players. He said he's willing to play some young players, but we're not completely seeing it. And he definitely has not bought into the young players that were already on the roster. We saw O'Brien Schofield say goodbye, and he really wasn't appreciated. He really wasn't in their plan from the beginning. You were in a discussion about the whole Ken Wisenhunt, Bruce Arians thing. And I want to hear your take on this, and I'm going to kind of give what I thought, because people killed Ken Wisenhunt for the way he didn't play rookies. I don't, and I'll give you my take in a bit. But I want to hear your side. Some of the things you were talking about on Twitter last night when it comes to Arians and playing the young players. Yes, he played some, but others are buried in the depth chart.
Yeah, and people get the misconception that that you have to play your draft picks, or if you draft a wide receiver in the first round, well, you have to play them. Well, wide receiver and cornerback are probably, outside of quarterback, are probably the 2 hardest positions to transfer skills into from college to the professional level. One of the things that I do in my draft analysis is I want to see translatable aspects to their games. If you go back and watch some of Michael Floyd's highlight reels from Notre Dame, they're really dynamic. They're really awesome to watch. But part of the problem is a lot of those plays he made were jump ball plays. They're I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm going to make this play over you type of throws and catches. And that doesn't translate to the NFL because a lot of corners, especially in the NFC West, are just as big and strong and can bully a big wide receiver just as well as a big wide receiver bullies a small cornerback. So I understood why Floyd was, some people said buried. I understood why Floyd was the number 3-4 wide receiver last year because he hadn't learned the nuances of the game. He wasn't a solid route runner. He didn't create separation in routes. And when you had a quarterback in Kevin Cobb who is not a throw the ball to a spot type of quarterback, he's more of a see it, throw it type of quarterback, which means unless the guy is open, he's not going to throw that pass. Then I understand why Floyd's numbers had the struggles he did. As far as the rest of it goes, though, playing rookies isn't the only part of playing young players. As you said, Wiz was really good about giving rookies, picking his spots with rookies and mixing them in, and then in year 2 he expected them to take a step up and fill a role. That's something we saw with Dan Williams, Beanie Wells, guys like that. He didn't give them the main job. He made them earn it, and then he felt like in year 2 a lot of times, okay, you've earned your playing time now. Here's your full spot. And I don't have a problem with that. And I don't have a problem with what Bruce Arians is doing. My whole point on the Twitter thing last night was I just said that if Wiz was not playing Minter and Okafor and the defense has had the struggles that they've had rushing the passer or in game 1, getting beat, just the linebackers getting beat, like a drum in coverage, we would have heard screams from the fan base about this is typical Wiz. He doesn't play, the rookies. He lets journeyman veterans come in and play. We know what they have already. Find out what the rookies have, type of thing. And I think that's fair because I think he didn't play the rookies unless he was comfortable with them, and that's kind of just how he was. And it seems like that's how Arians is too. He's comfortable with Tyrann Mathieu. Tyrann Mathieu doesn't play like a rookie. He plays like a seasoned veteran. He hasn't made a rookie mistake yet that we've seen. He will. He's a rookie. He's still young in the NFL, but his recognition skills, his ability to break on the ball, just things that he does that most people, most defensive players don't do in their first year in the league. You look at Andre Ellington and what Andre Ellington did. Andre Ellington, I think, has only played something like 20 total snaps on the season. So, I mean, are we really going to say, wow, Wiz is really using his rookies? I mean, that's great that he's letting Ellington get plays. Sorry, he's played 29 snaps on the season. That's great that he's allowing Ellington to get some work in, but is that really, leaning on a rookie to make plays? I wouldn't say it is. I think it's peppering him in, getting him used to the speed of the game, and maybe later they'll, add him in more. But I think it's really similar. I think what Arians is doing is really similar to what Wiz did. It's just that we're still in, as Kent on Twitter said, we're still in our honeymoon phase with Arians. So everything is, is new and great at this point.
And I completely agree with that. I completely agree with, but Ken Wisenhunt had that reputation. I mean, the only time that a rookie tended to start was out of injury necessity. Levi Brown did it, but that was only because who was the name? Oliver was out with an injury. Patrick Peterson stepped to the starting lineup because Greg Toller was out. But the notion that Wisenhunt, all he did was simply say, no, I'm not playing the rookies, no, I'm not playing the rookies, because he doesn't believe in playing rookies. They have to earn it, regardless of whether they're a better player. I always looked at it as a different thing. It's not necessarily who is the better player, but who's going to be the better player on the field, who's going to screw up less. And that's the one thing Wisenhunt made sure that he did. He made sure that he put the rookies in, as you said, in situations where they could succeed. He wasn't going to put them out there to... He tried to minimize the lumps they would take as rookies that would cost the team thing. And then he had great respect from the players in the locker room, so it wasn't like this was anything novel. He was simply protecting his team and saying, hey, you're going to play, you're going to get on the field and make plays, but you have to show that you're not going to screw up. You have to know what you're doing. Michael Floyd's a perfect example. He wasn't great at the routes. He made great strides this offseason. So I've never had a problem with the way Wisenhunt did things. Now, you do every once in a while. The problem was he did not have his most talented players. You take a Patrick Peterson was at a position where, hey, it's tough. There's a reason why he didn't want him out there. And we saw Patrick Peterson has tons of growing pains that first year. He gave up some bad. He looked bad on some plays, and he looked good in others. It just seems like this year there seems to be more of their draft picks, or at least they're at the top. Jonathan Cooper is special enough that, yeah, even if he makes mistakes, or he's not going to make mistakes because he's just playing smart. You bring in Matthew. He's just a special talent that he's going to make plays out in the field, and the plays he makes will outweigh the mistakes. Arians got a huge reputation a year ago for playing all those rookies. That was out of necessity. They didn't have anyone. They didn't have anyone in Indy. It wasn't the same case over here. Obviously, he's not dead set on playing young players. If you look at it, they brought in Eric Winston to replace Bobby Massey. They were okay with that. They brought in John Abraham so they could let go of O'Brien Schofield. They bring in veterans because they want to contribute. Now, I don't see, other than the fact that Arians talks about it more, I don't see how he is much different than Ken Wisenhunt, like you said.
Yeah, and I think it's just a misrepresentation of what Wiz does. It was, at the end, everybody was really jaded from Wisenhunt, and just the whole Wisenhunt era had rubbed people the wrong way, and so it just got to the point where we're putting the narrative as being more important than the actual substance of whatever's being said at that point, and that's not a bad thing. That happens a lot, as fans become disenchanted with the circumstances that they're in, losing 3 seasons, or losing seasons, or bad quarterback play, so on and so forth. That's what causes that type of stuff.
Definitely. So let's bring it back a little bit to the Lions game. What concerns do you still have? I imagine there's one thing you're going to hit on, it's that the lack of the pass rush. But what concerns do you have still coming out of that game and moving forward, especially with the Saints coming up this week?
The first concern I have is not anything the Cardinals can control, and that's that Drew Brees hasn't really played well yet. That concerns me. He's had for Drew Brees, he's had just an all right first 2 weeks. Obviously, as a Cardinals fan, we would take his numbers and run, and be ecstatic with them. But he really hasn't. He's made a lot of mistakes. He's gotten hit a ton, and I know that he played in a sloppy game against Tampa Bay, but even against Atlanta, I wouldn't say he was at his pinnacle of powers. He played great, don't get me wrong. I mean, he completed 74% of his passes, but there were still some issues there. That's what worries me, is that Drew Brees hasn't hit his stride yet. That's the first thing going into the Saints game, is that he hasn't hit his stride yet. So much like Calvin Johnson, you can only, those great players are only down for so long before they get back to being great. And so you just have to hope that, it's one more week of bad Drew Brees before he moves on to the next victim. Something the Cardinals can control other than the pass rush, and, as you said, is I'm still concerned with the offensive line. Like I said, they gave up way too many hits, and they've got a guy coming in and Cameron Jordan, who's just been kind of an animal the first 2 weeks of the season, rushing the passer. And so that concerns me a little bit. He's not your typical speed rusher off the edge. So that might be okay, because the Cardinals seem to struggle, especially Levi and Eric Winston seem to struggle with the speed rush more than they do a power rush or bull rush. So that could be something. Then obviously there's the fact that we haven't seen a pass rush from the Cardinals yet. The Saints' offensive line hasn't been great. So they've been good, but they haven't been great yet. Drew Brees has been sacked 5 times already through 2 games. So they're just barely behind the Cardinals in sacks given up. So this can be an opportunity for the Cardinals to maybe get some pass rush, because the thing with Drew Brees is, and we've seen this, time and time again, you can't allow him to sit back there for 7 seconds at a time and pick your defense apart, or he'll
do it. That's exactly what he'll do.
Exactly. And so if they don't find a way to maybe manufacture some hits on the quarterback, kind of dial up that old Ray Horton style and manufacture some pressure somewhere, then it could be a long day for the defense, and then the offense is going to have to find a way to trade punches instead of doing what they did this week and doing enough to win.
And for me, aside from Drew Brees, when's he going to wake up? Naturally, we have that matchup, much like in Week 1. Jimmy Graham is going to be. We'll see how they scheme for him this time around. But the other thing is that the offense still, while if it's been very reliable, it just hasn't finished yet. It's still getting some kinks out of the way, working through some kinks. But they've only had a couple of 3-and-outs in their 2 games, which is one of the lowest rates in the league. But at the same time, they haven't been particularly explosive. And without Rob Hausler, who may come back this week, without Larry Fitzgerald at 100%, they're an okay offense at best. And now, granted, that's an improvement on last year. At best, they're okay. Last year, they were dreadful. But this year, we were expecting a little bit on the more explosive side, and I hope that can come around either by simply adding Hausler to the mix, and that just creates another, because Hausler is definitely more of a threat than Jim Dray. Even though Jim Dray can catch a few passes here and there, he's not going to be a threat down the field at all, and so he's not going to change the way defenses scheme for them. Are there any...
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, no, and I kind of talked about this in the article I just sent you, but the Cardinals receivers really, really struggled without Larry Fitzgerald being 100%, last week. And so the Saints defense is not great by any means. They're probably not even that, I don't want to say they're not good, because it's still early in the season and in the Rob Ryan, I almost said Rex Ryan, Rob Ryan era, but the Lions defense in secondary is notoriously not good. So it concerns me that if like you said, if Fitz isn't 100%, if Hausler isn't back, or if Hausler can't figure out how to catch the ball, what does this offense have? are they going to be able to turn into a grinded out, slow it down team and maybe, go with 35 carries as opposed to I think it was the 25 they had last week? That's a concern to me because Floyd and Roberts, neither of them stepped up. The guy that stepped up was Kerry Taylor, and he's a journeyman, who has been on several practice, he's been cut 6 times. So, as good as he was last week, there was a reason he was cut 6 times. Now, maybe he found his home in Arizona and he'll be able to make a good career out of it, but, there's still a reason he was cut 6 times. So there needs to be some type of threat there coming up soon here. And like you said, if Fitz is out, I do worry about that. I just didn't want to bring that up because I always sound so mean when I say that stuff.
Well, anything else look ahead to the Saints, and we talked about it a little bit. Anything else we should bring up for the good of the cause before we close up shop for the night?
I think just going forward, it's going to be fun to watch this team this year. It's fun to, and it's only been 2 games, but it's fun to know that your team is good enough to be in every game, or they should be good enough to be in every game. That's a nice thing. And you watch the last 2 games, and like you said, the Carson Palmer interception for a touchdown if that's last year and that's John Skelton, that game's over, and and whoever the team was wins by 10 or 13 or 17 points. Whereas this year, you feel like with Palmer at the helm, there's a calm in the huddle that allows them to kind of regroup and refocus their energies onto the game as opposed to what they did last year. So that's exciting. And then, for the football nerds, the guys that don't just watch the games to watch the games and have fun, for the football nerds, watch the complexity of what Bowles does in the back end of his defense against the Saints. This is going to be a chess match because, like I said, unless the Cardinals find the magic well of pass rushers coming up this week, they're going to have to try to confuse Drew Brees, which is not, something that many teams ever can do. So let's see what Todd Bowles dials up this week. Let's, if things do go bad, let's not overreact and say, oh, Bowles blew it, because we'll look at the film on Tuesday night or Wednesday and see, oh, he had his guys in a position to make plays, they just missed it. But let's watch that, because it's going to be a really fun chess match, and hopefully the Cardinals figure out a way to come out on top.
Well, thank you, Seth, for joining me as always. We have been listening to Revenge of the Birds radio. We're going to call it a night, guys. We've been on for a while. Thanks for listening. We'll be able to find this on revengeofthebirds.com. Please go visit the site. Get to the site. We've got some great content there. I write some stuff. Seth writes some stuff. We got some other great writers and great content on a daily basis. And if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan, there's nowhere better to go to talk with Arizona Cardinals fans. So thank you very much for calling. Thank you very much for listening, that is. And thank you, Seth, for calling in, as always. And we will be back. Hopefully, I will be able to line up a guest from Canal Street Chronicles for our Saints blog and talk previewing the game for Sunday. And I can do that on Thursday. At the very worst, we'll be back next Tuesday night. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good night. You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.